Max, stop it. You're not like them.
Oh, there's a them now.
Listen.
That's a fool! Go back to Fireland!
These two scenes have our protagonist grappling with bigotry and bias, but they do not work. Zootopia and Elemental are two films released by the Disney company that positions themselves as films that tackle the issue of race relations, and prejudice in a way that is easily digestible by children. Both films achieved financial success and critical acclaim. Zootopia grossed over $1 billion at the box office. Elemental struggled at first to find an audience at the box office, but over time it was able to achieve some financial success as well. Now, while I do enjoy both of these films, I can't help but think that their attempts to address the issue of race and prejudice quickly falls apart primarily because of their premise. In Zootopia, animals are used to explain race relations, and in Elemental, it's different elements such as water and fire. Unfortunately, because these films are substituting race with animals and elements, it severely undercuts the message they are trying to deliver, because it's impossible to truly capture the nuances of race relations if you're not using real races. I think it taps into a larger issue of race relations, and systemic racism being deemed as inappropriate topic for children. These topics are largely believed to be too mature for young audiences, but I fundamentally disagree with the notion that children are unable to understand the complexities of racism, especially when non-white children would undoubtedly experience some form of bias and prejudice from a very young age. Still, because that idea is so ubiquitous, to circumvent that, race substitutions are made that assume it would make the messaging easier for children to grasp. So in this video, we are going to be looking into some of the misguided ways in which these movies try to address the issue of race and how fundamentally both of their premises undermine their own messaging. First, let's start with Zootopia. Zootopia was released in 2016 and was directed and written by Brian Howard, who previously directed Bolt, Tangled, and more recently Encanto, as well as Rich Moore, who was the director of Wreck-It Ralph and Wreck-It Ralph 2. Zootopia was really well received. It won an Oscar for Best Animated Feature and went on to gross over $1 billion. The premise of the movie is that animals, specifically mammals, have evolved and no longer hunt and kill each other but live together in harmony. Zootopia is a city that symbolizes this harmony and cooperation among the animals. Still, despite all the advancements they've made, there are still anti-predator sentiments in the city. People who believe that predators are extremely dangerous, and those feelings are only further exacerbated after a string of predators mysteriously begin going savage. The movie follows Judy Hopps, the city's first rabid police officer, and Nick Wilde, a Foxconn artist, as they attempt to uncover the mystery in Zootopia. The film begins with a school play explaining the history of the animal world. We learn that over several years, animals have evolved beyond their primitive nature and no longer hunt or kill each other for survival. Predators and prey live in harmony in a world where they can do and be anything they want. Zootopia is a city created by the animals where predators and prey live together in peace. In the play, we are introduced to our main character, Judy Hopps, who has aspirations of becoming a police officer. We learn that despite this being an advanced utopian society for animals, there are still occupations dominated by specific species, and that no bunny has ever been a police officer. Judy's parents try to dissuade her from pursuing her dream of becoming a cop because they're concerned about her safety, but Judy is insistent on following her dreams. This is exactly what she wants to do with her life. After the play, Judy notices Gideon Gray, a fox, along with some other predators, picking on some other children. She steps in to defend them and gets attacked by Gideon in the process. Gideon tells Judy that she'll never become a cop and she'll always just be a dumb bunny. This only further strengthened Judy's resolve to make the impossible happen and become the first rabid police officer. Cut to a couple years later, Judy has enrolled in a police academy and really struggles to keep up with the other animals. They're all bigger, stronger, and faster than her, and she is told repeatedly by her instructor to just quit, give it up, and go home. But with a little bit of studying and practice, Judy was able to overcome all the obstacles in training and not only graduate from the police academy, but also graduate at the top of her class. Mayor Lionheart at the graduation ceremony congratulates Judy as being the first rabid police officer and reassigns her to a precinct in Zootopia. Before Judy heads off to her new job, she tells her parents bye, and they start speaking some pretty predator-phobic rhetoric. They tell her to be wary of all predators in the city, especially foxes, that it's in their DNA to be aggressive, and they recount the incident in her childhood with Gideon Gray as an example of this. But Judy says that not all foxes are bad. Gideon was just a jerk who happened to be a fox. Still, they wanted her to be safe, so they gave her a bunch of fox-related protective weapons, including a fox repellent. Anyway, she tells her family bye and heads off to Zootopia. We get a really beautiful sequence of Judy entering Zootopia, and we get all of these really amazing shots of different boroughs of the city, and it's just a really well animated sequence. You get the idea that this is a city made by animals for animals. So many structures that that were specifically created to cater to those groups of animals' needs. Just really beautiful animation, and honestly, the city seems so huge that I would actually want to visit it. Zootopia feels like a real place. You get the sense that there's really a lot to see there. Judy starts her first day on the job and is immediately dismissed for her small size and isn't taken seriously at work. We also find out that there are 14 missing mammals in the city, all of which are predators. However, Judy gets assigned parking duty but resolves to do the best at her job. While working, she notices a fox and was initially very suspicious of him. You know, a little bit of racial profiling. But after following him, the fox appears to just be a dad trying to buy a treat for his son, but is getting a hard time from the cashier, an elephant, who refuses to serve him, presumably because he's familiar with Nick or because they're just racist and don't serve predators. Judy intervenes to help the fox and even pays for the treat. Anyways, she runs into the fox again, Nick Wilde, and realizes he's a scam artist. He cons people to make a living. He really lays into Judy about the reality of Zootopia, that despite the selling point, it's not actually a city where predators and prey live in harmony, and you can't actually be whatever you want. The next day, Judy has the opportunity to prove herself as a cop and pursues a robber. During the pursuit, she was able to save a few lives and eventually apprehend the criminal. Unfortunately, Judy had to abandon her station to pursue the robber and got reprimanded by her boss. Meanwhile, a civilian enters saying that she still can't find her husband, who is one of the 14 missing predators. Judy promises to help her but is fired by her boss for insubordination. Fortunately, the assistant mayor steps in and approves Judy to take over the case, so her boss gives her 48 hours to find the missing otter, otherwise she has to resign. After reviewing the case file, she notices that Nick had sold him one of his popsicles on the last day he was seen, so she confronts him and blackmails him to help her find the missing otter. They do some investigating and find out that Otterton went savage, attacked a limo driver, then disappeared. Judy and Nick visit the limo driver to get more information, but before they could, he also goes savage and attacks them. They were able to restrain him, but by the time the rest of the ZPD shows up, he also disappears. The chief scolds Judy and derides that all predators probably seem savage to her because she's a bunny, because apparently predators have not gone savage since before all the animals evolved. He fires her and asks her to turn in her badge, but Nick points out that they still have more time before the 48 hours expires, so they continue working on the case. While heading back to the city, Nick recounts a story from his childhood where he wanted to join the Junior Ranger Scouts even though he would be the only predator among the troop, and on his initiation, he's attacked and muzzled by the other boys because they did not trust him because he's a predator, and since that day, he vowed to never let anyone see that they got to him, and if all the world is going to see is a sly fox, that's exactly what he's gonna be. They then realize that security cameras might have picked up the limo driver going savage, so they go to City Hall to ask the assistant mayor to review the footage. There they see footage of a group of wolves kidnapping the limo driver. They follow the group of wolves, night howlers, to a facility, and in that facility, all of the missing predators are being held, including the missing otter. We find out that Mayor Lionheart is actually the one kidnapping all the savage predators in an attempt to figure out what exactly is causing predators to revert to their primitive nature. Because he's the mayor, he's concerned about the optics of predators being seen as dangerous and aggressive. Still, they can't figure out what exactly is causing the predators to go savage, and his scientists suggest that it might just be their biology. Mayor Lionheart is arrested, and Judy delivers an explanation to the press about the attacks, and she reiterates the scientists' hypothesis that the reason only predators are going savage may be due to their DNA, remnants from their history of being aggressive hunters. Nick confronts her about her bigoted views and whether that means she's also scared of him because he's a predator. He approaches her, she reaches for her fox repellent, proving his point. Nick leaves, and in the incoming days, the city becomes more and more divided as predator attacks against prey increases. There are protests and general mistrust of the population towards predators. The police department decides to make Judy the face of the department to assuage concerns around predators. She declines after realizing how badly her comments have affected the city. She quits and heads back home to live with her parents and become a carrot farmer. While there, she reunites with Gideon Gray, her childhood bully, who is currently working with her parents. Now, if you'll remember, from the beginning of the movie, Judy's parents were very anti-predator and especially anti-fox, but they explained that her success in Zootopia challenged them to open their minds and be more accepting of predators. Gideon apologizes to Judy for bullying her as kids and that he was just going through a lot of insecurities at that age. While on the farm, Judy realizes that night howlers weren't the wolves but flowers that causes any animal predator or prey to turn savage. She heads back to Zootopia to apologize to Nick and get his help to unravel the conspiracy to paint all predators as being predisposed to being violent and aggressive. We find out that the assistant mayor was behind the conspiracy in a plot to hold on to power by turning the 90% of prey population against the 10% predator population. In the end, Judy and Nick are able to outsmart her and reveal her plot. She gets arrested, they infected predators are cured, and Nick officially joins the police force. Zootopia as a concept was heavily influenced by a period of time where Disney was making several animated movies about anthropomorphic animals. Particularly, the film was influenced by Robin Hood. Now, in speaking about bringing the film together, the creators and producers continuously use the word bias.
Bias in a modern way, because bias is something that is universal. It exists everywhere around the world.
They make it a point that this movie is not specifically about racism or misogyny or any other form of bigotry, but bias, something everyone can relate to. The issue is that while the movie tries to apply this overgeneralization of bias, there are many specific references made to race primarily by relying on stereotypes.
You probably didn't know, but a bunny can call another bunny cute, but when other animals do it, it's a little...
Go back to the forest, predator!
I'm from the savannah! Nick, stop it. You're not like them.
Oh, there's a them now.
So the movie is a commentary on bias in general, but the subtext is explicitly about racism. Even in the footage where the creators are in boardrooms workshopping ideas for the film, they explicitly mention racism. But not all biases are the same. Marginalized identities are not persecuted in the same way. There are so many nuances and complexities in the way racism, misogyny, and homophobia shows up in our society, so there can never truly be one blanketed way to respond to all forms of bigotry. Therein lies the issue with Zootopia's premise, because despite the fact that no animal is a direct allegory for a specific race, predator and prey group can be seen as an allegory for the white and black population. Specifically, the fact that prey represent a 90% majority in the city and seem to hold some structural power, and predators are assumed to be genetically predisposed to violence in the way that black men have been oftentimes been assumed to be more prone to violent crimes. So without the film explicitly making these references, we can infer these racial undertones. So it is a bit misguided to want to make a general statement on bias while relying heavily on racial stereotypes. Now let's look into Elemental. Elemental was released in 2023 and was directed by Peter Sohn, who had previously directed The Good Dinosaur. The Good Dinosaur is considered to be a failure by the Pixar studio. It never really caught on, so Elemental was really an opportunity for Peter to redeem himself. Elemental follows anthropomorphic animals, water, fire, air, and earth in Element City. The film starts with the first wave of fire people arriving in Elemental City, a city where all elements live together. A fire couple is arriving in the city. The woman is very pregnant, and as they arrive, they are given the names Bernie and Cinder. They don't speak the language and are given new names, which honestly I kind of felt bad about, but it is true for a lot of immigrants. We see that the city is designed in a way that mostly benefits water elements. There are a lot of infrastructure that specifically caters to their needs, and that's because water was the first wave of people to arrive in the city, then earth, then air. We see that Bernie has some bias towards water people because of this. After arriving in the city, they move to what appears to be an abandoned part of the city that used to house earth elementals. They find an abandoned building, Cinder gives birth to a baby girl, they set up their home and open a business called The Fireplace. From the beginning, Bernie makes it clear that the business will be passed on to Ember one day when she's old enough. As years go by, more and more fire people immigrate to Element City, and Ember continues to work at her dad's store. We see very early on that she has a talent for glass sculpting. Anyways, Bernie still has a strong bias against water people because they come in and mess up his store and try to water him down. Ember, while working at her dad's shop, struggles to control her temper and flares up in really explosive ways. Her dad wants her to control her temper, and that if she can, she'll finally be ready to take over the shop. Bernie at this point has also gotten older and is struggling to keep up with the work demand. He's weaker and slower than Ember, and so the time is coming where he finally needs to retire. Meanwhile, Cinder is a relationship guru and really wants Ember to fall in love and get married. The last dying wish of her grandmother was that she would marry fire.
Promise me one thing, marry fire.
Bernie lets Ember know that she will have the opportunity to run the shop on her own the next day, and that if she is able to do so without losing her temper, she will finally be ready to take over the shop. On the next day of the Red Dot sale, Ember immediately loses her anger after becoming overwhelmed by customers, so she runs down to the basement and explodes, causing the pipes to burst, and a water guy who turns out to be a city inspector bursts through. He writes up several citations of the business that could lead to the store being shut down and heads off to City Hall to send them through. Ember pursues him in a chase through Element City, and we get sequences of the city, and I have to say I don't really love the design of Element City. That's really one thing I think Zootopia did better, which was that Zootopia as a city felt like it was designed for animals by animals. There are infrastructure in place that specifically cater to those creatures' needs. But Element City doesn't feel like it was designed by elements. It just looks like a city that elements found and configured for them to live in. Like, why do air elements need to travel by Zeppelin? We also see how little the city has changed since the arrival of fire people. There's still still no real infrastructure in place to accommodate them. In fact, there's a train that runs right over Firetown that splashes water all over the town. Now we also see how volatile fire's reaction is to other elements. The city really isn't designed with fire people in mind, but fire people also have a somewhat potentially destructive reaction with things around the city. We see Ember having to be very careful not only for her safety, but for the safety of other people around her, whereas the other elements seem to be able to coexist with no issue whatsoever. Anyways, Wade the water guy sent off the citations, but it's too late and Bernie's business will be shut down. Ember heads back to the store and the bursts in the pipes have gotten worse. Bernie continues to blame the water guy, not knowing of Ember's involvement in it at all. And we get some backstory as to why Ember's parents even came to Element City in the first place. In their home country, Fireland, every person has a blue flame that connects them to their history and heritage. They were able to build a business in Fireland, but it was destroyed due to a storm, so they decided to leave Fireland to create a better life. Now, I don't think that the movie did a really great job of explaining why Ember's parents had to leave. The storm did destroy their business and most of their blue flame, but they were able to recover some of it, so maybe that's why they had to leave, because their blue flame wasn't strong enough. But we do see that once they moved to Element City, they were able to build on the blue flame and get it stronger again. So was it just because they lost their business and had to start over? Because when they moved to Element City, they still had to start all over from scratch in an abandoned building. So why exactly did they have to leave? Why couldn't they just rebuild in Fireland? I also don't think that the movie needed to make up a reason for them to leave. Lots of immigrants moved to the United States just for the possibility of better opportunities and just wanting more. So they didn't have to have a tragedy happen to them. They could have just wanted to move to Element City. I don't know, that wasn't super clear to me. But regardless, they felt they had to leave to create a better life. Ember realizes she has to save the store to prevent a repeat of what happened to her parents in Fireland. So with the help of Wade, she was able to convince his boss Gale to give them an opportunity to fix the leaks in the shop in return for ignoring the citations. Ember and Wade go off to find the source of the leaks. On their way, Ember and Wade get to know each other a little more. Ember tells him of an instance where she and her dad went to see a Vivisteria flower, a flower that is known to thrive in any environment including fire. But once they arrived, they were denied entry because no fire people were allowed. The situation escalated to the security guard telling them to go back to Fireland, and all the other patrons started making racist and xenophobic remarks to them. Ember and Wade were able to find the source of the leak, a crack in the wall that sends water rushing into Firetown whenever a ship passes through a canal. By working together, Ember and Wade were able to temporarily seal the hole until Wade could get a proper construction crew to patch it up. Wade asks Ember out on a date the next day and they explore more of the city and spend more time together. And Ember's mom even starts sensing that she likes someone. Now, here's where it gets a little weird. Since the beginning of the movie, we've heard the phrase elements don't mix. But throughout the movie, we see elements, particularly water, earth, and air, interacting and coexisting all the time. So elements do mix, but this scene indicated that that phrase was less about segregation and more about interracial coupling. Because despite cohabitating, the elements really do not mix. So Ember and Wade start to develop feelings for each other, but are unable to act on those feelings because it could be potentially dangerous for both of them. Meanwhile, the sandbags did not hold and the shop continues to leak water, and Wade was unable to get a construction company to fix the hole in the wall. Bernie also finds out about Wade and really puts him through the ringer, and in the process he insults him and gets banned from the shop. Ember and Wade decide to create more sandbags to patch up the hole, but their deadline is approaching. Ember breaks down when she realizes she's running out of time and really feels overwhelmed with a sense of responsibility to pay back her parents' sacrifice for building a better life for her. But she also realizes that her skill of glassmaking could be used to patch up the wall. So Ember is able to fix the hole in the wall using her talent, and Wade invites Ember to meet his family. We see that Wade comes from an extreme privilege and an affluent family, which makes sense because water was the first wave of people to arrive in the city. Ember was able to show off her glassmaking skills to the family, and Wade's mom is really impressed and suggests she does something with her skill. Later that night, Wade professes to Ember just how much he means to her. At the end of the night, Wade's mom offers Ember a job honing her glassmaking skills outside of the city. Ember begins to get frustrated because she realizes she doesn't want to run her father's shop and that she feels trapped under the weight of obligation to pay back her parents' sacrifice. Ember's mom confronts them and does a smoke reading on them to prove that they cannot be together. However, the smoke reading shows that they're actually in love. Meanwhile, Bernie announces his retirement and that in 2 days Ember will take over the shop, even creating a new sign with her name. He explains that before he left Fireland, he gave his father the big bow, the highest form of respect, but his father did not reciprocate. He did not approve of him leaving, believing that if he left Fireland, he would lose what it meant to be fire. Ember now feels pressure to take over her father's shop and goes to tell Wade her plans to not take his mom's offer. But before she does, he takes her to see the Vivisteria flower, despite it being flooded. And Wade gives this speech about how no one should be able to tell you what to do, and it's like, yeah, but this is potentially life-threatening. If someone's goal was to climb the top of Mount Everest and they wanted to do it without equipment, I wouldn't be like, yeah, go for it, don't let anyone tell you what to do, cause you could die. Just another instance of what could have been an impactful message getting undercut by the film's own premise. Anyways, she was able to see the flower and make it out barely in time. Wade and Ember decide to try touching despite the obvious risks and are able to embrace each other just fine. Apparently when they touched, it changed their chemistry, so it's fine for them to touch each other from now on. Ember remembers her responsibilities though and runs off. Wade doesn't understand why she feels she can't just do what she wants, and they break up. Wade crashes the ceremony to hand over the shop to Ember and professes his love to her. Ember doesn't reciprocate his feelings and tells him to leave. Bernie, disappointed, takes back his retirement after learning that Ember caused the leak and has been seeing Wade behind his back. The next day, the glass holding the wall breaks and sends a flood to Firetown. Ember tries to save her parents from the flood, and with the help of Wade, also tries to save her family's blue flame. Ember and Wade get trapped in the shop, however, and under the heat, Wade begins to evaporate. Ember is heartbroken by Wade's sacrifice, but through trying to make him cry, he was able to come back through condensation. I think that's how that works. Anyways, Wade comes back and Ember lets her father know that she doesn't want to take over the shop. He explains that the shop was never the dream, but she was, and gives her his blessing to follow her dream. Ember and Wade leave Element City to pursue their dreams, and it seems that their relationship has encouraged more elements to mix. Before they leave, Ember gives her father the big bow, and he reciprocates. Now this movie is based heavily on the director Peter Sohn's life. It's not completely autobiographical, but he does pull a lot of inspiration from his own experience being born to two Korean immigrant parents. This movie was really a way for him to explore his own experience dealing with racism and xenophobia while growing up in New York City. Unfortunately, his parents passed away before this film could be released. Now, I had a lot more issues with Elemental than I did with Zootopia. Elemental just felt very derivative of other stories we've already seen and heard. It doesn't really offer anything new in terms of storytelling. Though I do think that a lot of kids born from immigrant parents will be able to relate to a lot of moments in this film, and that is where Peter being able to pull from his own experiences really comes in handy. But overall, the story felt really predictable and almost overly simplistic in its approach. I think maybe in trying to send their message to kids, they underestimated how well kids would be able to follow along. I mean, Fireland, Firetown, Element City is just super unimaginative, not to mention the countless element puns. Now, I think the biggest saving grace for this film is its animation, particularly with fire people. I was continuously mesmerized by how beautifully they were animated. Anytime a fire person was on screen, I couldn't take my eyes off them. I don't think this is a bad film at all, and nowhere near Pixar's worst film, but it definitely isn't their best either. Just very middle of the road. But now let's look at why Zootopia and Elemental fundamentally fail due to their premise. Now, if you think about either of these films for longer than a minute, you'll realize that the race allegory is completely undermined because of their substitution using animals and elements. Predators and prey cannot peacefully coexist. A rabbit and a fox cannot be friends, and water and fire cannot mix. The movies have to introduce a supernatural disruption in order to make these ideas work. In Zootopia, animals have evolved and predators no longer hunt prey, and in Elemental, Ember and Wade are able to be together thanks to a change in their chemistry. That is the only way these movies can work, but it still presents the idea that these beliefs are rooted in bigotry, and that there is no logical reason for there to be any form of segregation in these societies. But that's not true. Preys have logical reasons to be terrified and distrustful of predators, especially since the movie established that there was a time when predators did hunt and kill prey. So a family of rabbits being scared of a tiger isn't coming out of nowhere. It makes the idea even more muddled when you stop to ask yourself, if predators no longer hunt prey, then what do they eat? Not all predators are omnivores, some predators have to eat meat, so in this utopian society, how are predators really able to coexist with prey? There's this big climactic scene in the movie where Judy has given a talk about the recent predator attacks, and she suggests that the predator attacks can be traced back to their biology, that predators intrinsically are violent and aggressive, and Nick confronts her and she has to address her own bigotry and bias in that moment. Nick asks her, "I'm a fox, are you scared of me?" He asks her if she really thinks he'd eat her, and she draws for her weapon, and we see that Judy has always harbored these ideas despite believing herself to be an open-minded person. That from the moment she saw Nick, a fox, she made all these inferences about his assumed criminality solely based on the fact that he's a predator. And it's a really profound scene where Judy and Nick have to grapple with that idea. But in our minds, we're supposed to draw the comparison of a white cop drawing a weapon against an unarmed person of color and all the biases that a cop might have about their criminality. But we know that in the real world, a police officer has no justifiable reason to assume anything about a person's innocence solely based on their race. A cop has no real reason to be scared of an unarmed person enough to draw a weapon. And even though we know Judy is not in any real danger in this moment, we also know that a rabbit does have a reason to be scared of a fox. So it just severely undercuts the moment and the message because we know that's not how that works. Take for example Lion King. When Simba goes off to live with Timon and Pumbaa, we know that a lion living with a meerkat and a warthog probably wouldn't end well. But we're able to suspend disbelief because that's not the point of the movie. The movie isn't trying to make a profound statement about race and bias. It doesn't matter if it's unrealistic because the plot is about Simba overcoming betrayal and taking his place as king. And in fact, the movie does acknowledge the fact that lions do eat prey in this world, and it's necessary and simply a part of the circle of life. So in all those other Disney films about anthropomorphic animals, ordinarily we wouldn't question whether or not a fox and a rabbit could be friends because those films aren't trying to add any greater meaning onto those relationships. But Zootopia is. When we look at Elemental, we see the same problems showing up. The movie shows us that fire people have essentially been segregated from the rest of the city. There's no infrastructure that caters to their needs and they've been ostracized. But the movie also shows us that there's probably a good reason for that because fire could potentially be dangerous for other elements, including themselves. So while we're watching this love story between a fire girl and a water boy unfold, there's this constant nagging feeling that maybe elements not mixing is a good idea because she could potentially evaporate him and he could extinguish her. So this movie actually reinforces some racist ideas because of its own premise. We know that there's no harm whatsoever in two people from different races falling in love and being together, but we're sitting here watching fire and water attempt to date, and at certain points you're forced to be like, yeah, maybe elements should be segregated. There's a scene in Elemental where Ember is recounting an experience with her father where they experience xenophobia and racism. Now while watching this scene, I couldn't help but think about the logistics of actually having fire people in this environment. The Vivistera flower can thrive in any environment including fire, but there are probably many other plants that would be burnt if fire people come into contact with them. We see how every time Claude, the earth kid who has a crush on Ember, gives her a flower, it burns once she touches it. So it's a really weird feeling when the movie puts you in a position to say that the bigoted security guard might actually have a point. We already see how potentially dangerous fire interacting with other elements could be, and so despite this movie positioning itself as an allegory for race, it felt more like an allegory for people living with disabilities. The only real difference between people of different races is some physical appearances such as skin color and culture. But in Elementals, the elements' differences is so much more than their physical appearance. Their genetic makeup literally prevents them from being able to participate in some activities, and so it felt more like a metaphor for how our society by and large is designed to exclude disabled people from participating in everyday activities, and therein lies one of the main problems when substituting race when making an allegory like this, because that idea severely undercuts what would have been a really impactful scene on bigotry. I already know I'm gonna get so much pushback from people saying I'm taking this way too seriously, these are movies for kids, I'm reading way too much into it, and I always find those criticisms to be so reductive because art made for kids is still art and it's still deserving of critique, analysis, and to be taken seriously. Why is it that just because things are made for children, we as adults should view them as trivial and not worthy of analysis? And I also really disagree with the idea that in order to teach kids about bigotry and racism, you have to do it in this way, otherwise children won't be able to understand the complexities of racism. Because black kids, Asian kids, and Latino kids at varying ages understand racism. They have to navigate the same world that you and I do. Even if they can't fully articulate what it is, they see it and feel it every day. A study conducted in 2021 on kids aged 10 and 11 found that 10% of black children felt discriminated against based on their race, and 20.5% of Native Americans and 20.1% of black children felt they were treated unfairly by their peers due to their race or ethnicity. And there have been other programming in the past targeted towards kids that do address the issue of race and bias in a way that is representative of how these issues actually appear in the real world. There was this kids show on PBS called Puzzle Plays that aired in the mid-90s. It was a show that used puppets to portray kids of different races and ethnic backgrounds. It was at a time where animation was expensive and puppets were considered a cheaper, more appropriate medium for kids programming. This show tackled issues around race and prejudice in a way that did not at all shy away from the issue. Defunctland has an in-depth history about this show. I really suggest you check it out. My point is, you don't have to substitute race for animals or elements to tell a compelling story about race and prejudice. And I think that we do ourselves a huge disservice by assuming children are incapable of handling difficult topics like these. We should give kids more credit than that and equip them with the tools and skills they need to battle bias as it appears in their everyday lives. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.